Hello, historians. Welcome back to Cocktails and Cliff Notes. I'm your host, Mayson. And today we're going to be diving into one of the cleanest deals that America ever made. There was no war, no bloodshed, no conquest, just a handshake across the ocean, $15 million, a signature on parchment, and a nation immediately doubles in size. This is the Louisiana Purchase. This was a perfect, peaceful land deal. And that's at least how the story has been told for a couple hundred casual years. However, history does have a habit of trimming away all the inconvenient, not so pretty parts. The rough edges get smoothed out, and quiet voices can often complicate the narrative. Now, when you look a little bit closer at that very precise, very clean land deal, you stop seeing it as just this blank canvas and you can tend to realize something very, very unsettling. And that is that the land that America purchased was not exactly empty. It was not the cleanest deal in history, and the consequences of that deal were anything but peaceful. Now, we're going to be diving into the indigenous impact of the Louisiana Purchase. But before we jump into that, let's get a quick drink to sip on while we do so. If you do want to skip that, I don't blame you. Just use the timestamps below. Always be on the lookout for more content like this. I post sporadically throughout the week. I was trying so hard to adhere to a schedule and it wasn't working. So I just post when I post. And sorry. I was trying. It's too hard out here. I'm not a great schedule keeper, I guess. Anyway, just skip if you want to. If not, go ahead and stick with me. And if you like history and you like knowing things just for the sake of knowing things, this might be the place for you. So let's get our nice cocktail and let's get into our story, okay? Now, I know that I have been super lazy if you've watched any of my recent videos as far as the drink goes, and I have been doing alcohol-based beverages. However, I just had my birthday, and one of the things that I like to get on my birthday is a giant case of Diet Dr. Pepper, which I got for myself. And then my little sister got me a whole bunch of them too. So I am flush with Diet Dr. Pepper, and I usually just drink those till they're gone. And then I try not to drink it very often throughout the year. So we're going to skip everything, any and all things. I just want to drink this. I really don't drink heavily like I used to. So I've kind of been joking that this is what becomes of someone that, doesn't really drink for my birthday anymore. I literally celebrate with my favorite soda, but that's what we're doing. So love it or love it. Oh, that's so good. I think anybody that has gotten on like a soda, like a specific one, you get it. Like the I know it sounds so silly, but like the burn of the throat and everybody that I know that has like a slight dependency on soda, I always have like a very specific way that they have to get it. Like some people need it to be like a fountain Coke. I need my Diet Dr. Pepper out of a can or it just doesn't do it for me. And I used to make fun of people like that. And now I'm that way. And I'm like, I totally get it. I totally get it. It has to be a can. I need to hear the little, the lid pop. And these are so good. Oh, it's my favorite. I really, really try not to drink soda. But it's my birthday gift to myself. I can do things that are poor for my health. Okay, now that we have something to sip on, let's just go ahead and get into our story today. If you were to go open pretty much any textbook anywhere, Louisiana appears as a vast waiting space. You learn all about the purchase. You can go watch that if you want to, but you just see it on old maps as just this big wide open territory that was ready for the taking, and it was time to move in and explore, and it was this industrious purchase, and all of that is true. You would see all these forests, these plains, amazing rivers running through the wilderness, and this is a continent that is holding its breath for American destiny, manifest destiny. And it's a really, really pretty image, and it's exciting, and it raises your heart rate, and it's beautiful and thrilling and all of those things. But unfortunately, that particular image is slightly fictional. All of those things are absolutely true. But before 1803, the Louisiana Territory was not silence. It was language, it was ceremony, it was trade, law, memory. There were millions of people that were already living there. These people were not just wandering around aimlessly. They were not just faded into the background. They governed nations. They were a strong, beautiful people with rich culture and rituals and memory and amazing ways of doing life. So, from the Great Lakes all the way down to the Gulf, from the Mississippi to the plains beyond the Missouri, the land was just pulsing with life. Now, you had the Osage tribe, and they controlled vast hunting grounds, trade routes, and their power was shaping diplomacy across their particular region. Then you had the Mandan and the Hidatsa, and they sat at the heart of northern trade networks. Their villages were anchoring commerce that stretched for hundreds of miles. Then you've got Omaha, Ponca, Kansa, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arikara, and so many others, you guys. Like so many, I could not sit here and name them all, but they held very defined territories. They were governed by their own councils, they had kinship systems, they had law. These were not temporary settlements, these were homelands, these were places that they had dwelled for God only knows how long. Now, routes that they used were not mapped out with ink. They remembered them. They knew where they were. They knew where they were supposed to be, where they shouldn't be. They had alliances that were often negotiated, renewed, broken, and even repaired at times. Conflicts were well managed within different tribal lands. Economies actually thrived at this time. This was not vast wilderness. This was an entire world, an ecosystem, if you will. And that world was about to be redefined without any consent given by the people that occupied it. So, when France sold Louisiana to the United States, it sold something that it technically did not control. Napoleon's signature was a transfer of European claims, not necessarily indigenous sovereignty. So, no tribal leaders obviously were consulted as a result of this. No councils were convened, no consent was given. On paper, the land changed hands, but on the ground, there was absolutely no change whatsoever. Unfortunately, it would. It was going to change, and it was going to change rapidly, relentlessly. I'm telling you, the ink dried, and settlers immediately poured west. They were like, we got to check this out. There were, of course, surveyors who arrived first, and then, of course, farmers came. There were towns that were shooting up. And to the United States government, this land now had a future. We could expand even more than we ever thought that we could. Now, to indigenous nations, it had an expiration date. Pressure as a result of this mounted almost immediately. Tribes were told to move temporarily. They were promised protection, they were promised permanence, but those promises were written into treaties that we know were constantly broken with a chilling consistency that I think to most humans brings quite a bit of shame and shock. Now, I do want to point out that not every single treaty was broken because there was a terribly awful human who drew it up and knew that they were going to break it. There were things that happened, power shifted between people, and accidents happened. There were a lot of people who passed away that were going to enforce those treaties and they just weren't there after that. A lot got shaken up, but yes, a lot of it was obviously very shady. It was calculated. It was just careless in a lot of ways. And so it was just not going well. And of course, one treaty followed another. And then each treaty was claiming to be the final treaty. This is the last time that we're going to amend this particular document. Each one quietly revised the next. Land cessions were very, very rarely a voluntary thing. They came under the threat of violence, economic strangulation, broken supply agreements, pretty much anything that they could come up with to fearmonger the people that they were dealing with. Now, some leaders, they actually signed these treaties just to buy time for them, their families, and their tribe. Some refused outright and they were removed forcibly. Some resisted and they were still overpowered and removed forcibly. Now, the Osage tribe, once dominant, they were very much pushed aside. The Sioux and the Fox were driven into direct conflict. The Black Hawk War erupted from these particular pressures, and this was not something that was accidental. It was policy. Removal was very much framed as protection. Displacement was seen as progressive. Now, all of this that was going on, all of this shakeup, could easily be traced back to that very peaceful purchase that America made with France. Now, indigenous nations, they did not vanish quietly. They were very adaptable and they did. They negotiated, they resisted, some formed new alliances, some took up arms, some moved, regrouped, and overall, they did endure because they didn't really have another choice. It wasn't something that they really had a say in. Now, survival itself became strategy, identity became resistance. Even as the land shrunk, culture, of course, persisted. But the cost was enormous. Land is not just soil, it's ceremony, it's burial, it's story, it's memory. So when the tribes were removed, they were not just relocated. And this we know, they were severed. They were cut off from their homelands. They were also condensed into smaller territories. So you have to think about that, where everybody had space to roam and live as peaceably as they possibly could. Now they're being consolidated into much smaller areas against their will. So think about even that particular facet of this removal from their homelands. It's really sickening and sorrowful. Sacred sites were not exactly abandoned or destroyed. Now, seasonal migrations were actually disrupted. Spiritual practices tied to place became entirely impossible. Then came assimilation. There were boarding schools, which were sickening and absolutely unbearably corrupt and awful, brutal in every sense of the word. You probably have heard of this. We might talk about it at some point. They were absolutely gut wrenching. There were language bans, which is insane. There were forced conversions, which is it's just outrageous. Especially, I always like to point this out, especially considering that we, America, was a nation that was founded on freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of literally everything that we could think of. But for some reason, there were people who saw that they could actually enforce, but not be enforced upon. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly or nicely or legibly. What the point that I'm making is this whole country demanded freedom. Like that we would not tolerate anything else. We came here to find it, we fought to defend it, and then we turn around and say you can't speak in your own language, you can't believe what you want to believe, you have to go to these boarding schools to learn our ways because we don't like the way that you are. And then on top of all of this, there were children that were taken from families, there were names that were absolutely erased, their hair, their sacred hair was cut, and their songs were absolutely outlawed and silenced. And the trauma of all of this did not necessarily end in the 1800s. It just echoed through generations and through generations, onward and onward. And many of the challenges that are facing Indigenous communities, even today, are not necessarily ancient mysteries. They're consequences. They're consequences of displacement, of broken treaties, of cultural suppression. But this is not technically a story of disappearance. That is not how I want this to go. It's actually a story of endurance. And languages to this day are still being revived, and sacred sites are still being defended. Sovereignty is reasserted in courts and councils, and history did not necessarily end with the Louisiana Purchase. it actually lives on. To tell the Louisiana Purchase as a simple land deal is to erase the people who actually paid its price. And a fuller history does not diminish America. Once again, I do feel that it deepens it greatly. It asks us to hold the complexity of two things in opposite directions being true at once, because the Louisiana Purchase, of course, was this amazing thing that made the world that we know today. And not all of it is bad. I promise you that. Please don't come at me saying that all of it is bad, because that's just not true. There are a lot of really amazing things that came out of that very clean land deal. It was truly incredible for the country, especially considering we have no idea where things could have ended up. But I like the way we are. I mean, I know that we went through some rough shit and we did some crazy stuff, but the way that this country is not all bad. And it really did open for expansion and growth and exploration, and all of these amazing things came out of that particular purchase. But there are two sides to every single coin. And that's one thing that I really want people to avoid, is thinking that something like that could be all good or all bad, because that's not true. There are very few things where that's the case. I mean, there are things that are going to be good and bad out of every single thing that's happened through all of history. There are very few things where there wasn't some kind of a double-mindedness or a two sides, two things being true at once, stuff like that. There's always going to be different sides to every single story. And so, yes, the Louisiana Purchase was truly incredible, but there was a ripple effect that affected millions of people in a very negative way. If you look at that complexity, you can actually recognize that nation building came with a lot of human costs on both sides, all sides. And if you listen where history once spoke over others, this is not about guilt. This is about truth. The Louisiana Purchase reshaped the entire nation, really the entire continent for that particular matter, but it also disrupted countless other communities, and it wasn't necessarily the most clean and beautiful thing that we remember it to be. And if you really do want to understand American history, or again, history of all types in all places at any point in time, for that matter, I mean, I'm telling you, you have to know the whole story. You have to look at every single side of it. You can't just look at the side that you resonate with the most or that you get worked up with. There are two sides to every single thing. You have to look at not just who gained the land, but who lost their homes. You have to look at every single angle to really get a good view of what was going on. And I don't think that that's a negative thing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with just looking with a very objective, not getting too swept up in one particular side of the story, which is what people tend to do. I think if you just look at it and you look at the facts, then you can step back and mull over what you think about that particular thing and where you stand on that particular point in history. And I urge you to do that today. And instead, we get so emotional about what might be going on, or this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, I'm right, you're wrong type of stuff. And people get really worked up over these things. But if you could just have it in your body to take a quick step back and look at both sides with a very objective eye and say, these are the policies and the things that are going on here. And this is the complete opposite side that I would ever think I would agree with. But here are the fundamental policies that they believe in. And then you need to really sit down again without emotion in your heart and say, what do I agree with? And who am I as a person? And what side do I actually stand for? And you might just find that there are points and things and people on both sides of every single argument or debate, or even in your personal life, there are two sides and you might agree with little bits of both. You don't have to be all one way or the other. You can believe two things to be true at once. And that's what I urge you to explore after listening to this today. And if this story or this particular discussion added any sort of depth to what you thought you knew, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even consider sharing it with someone who needs to look at the world a little bit more broadly and a little bit more, what would I say here? A little bit more full circle. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I do want to just point out that if you can just open your mind for 1 second and listen or look at the other side of history, whichever side you've been looking at, make an effort to look at the other side. Find even a shrine of empathy within your body. Put yourself in the other person's shoes or the other party's shoes. You might learn something. You might even just get more solid in what it is that you believe in the first place, but at least you'll truly know. And you'll know that you actually believe what you believe, not because you heard someone else say it and you're just repeating something that you watched in a 10-second clip or a 30-second TikTok or whatever the hell you watch. Like, really think these things through and think them through rather clearly. And then you can decide where you stand or what you believe or what type of person you want to be. Fortunately, we are not the type of animal, us humans, that is just subjected to the way that we are. We actually get to decide who we want to be and how we want to behave. But a lot of people don't do that. We don't ever sit there and stop and think, is this who I am and what I actually really want to put out in the world? What do I really truly and honestly believe? And I know that got a little bit preachy, but really at the end of this, let's just really honestly, I want to say cheers, but we should also really pour one out to all the people on both sides that shaped and survived the world as it was and how we know it now, because the past is certainly not settled, never has been. And the stories that we choose to tell shape the future that we are, in fact, willing to build. And so I just urge you to look at the true history that we tend to overlook, especially the stuff that we overlook, because if you have a full view of what's behind us, you might be able to set your compass towards better things in front of us. And this I urge you to consider and do better and be better and believe better and research better and just push yourself a little bit. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. And until next time, I hope you have a really, really lovely week. And I will see you very soon.